Here's his first novel, In the Name of the Father.
Yeah, that's the one I'm most familiar with, and that's Chicago. And
Yeah. Then he's got Heart of the Order.
Heart of the Order again, and the baseball. I compared that to John Fonte and his.
Oh yeah, he's a fantastic writer. And the Evening News, short stories. Another collection of short stories called Taking It Home.
Okay.
And
I
then
think,
the Garden of Papa Santuzzu.
now that's the best cover picture in the business.
Yeah. Yeah, it kind of has a Zorba the Greek.
Yeah, well, that's my
But
first.
they say una faccia, una razza.
See,
Same face, same race.
That was from
the wonderful
Mediterranean.
line from the movie Mediterraneo.
Okay.
There it is, Tony.
Yes, here.
Look at that.
That's Tony.
Is Tony outside? No,
There's Tony. He could have been a movie star, but he turned down Hollywood. Here he could have been Serpico's double.
Ooh,
oh, yeah. Well, that's more a recent picture.
And there he is.
He has a really nice picture on his Emeriti site that University, Indiana University
I don't know.
supports.
Who's that guy?
That's me.
It's Diane.
Okay, we've
I
been
just gave
talking about
everybody a tour of all your books.
How wonderful. All right.
How's the warm-up act?
Tony, tell us
Okay.
a little bit about your background and then about your work,
Okay.
and maybe a preview of your latest work. And Carla will ask some questions. We have Fred Garnafay here, so we have a brain trust.
Wonderful. Let me start, Dominic. Let me start by thanking you. I want to thank you for what you did for me. And I want to thank you what you're doing for Italians, not only in Chicago, but all across the Americas and the world. I really, really appreciate the help that you gave me. When years ago, I gave a reading, I think it was at your invitation at Circle Campus.
Mhm.
And you gave me a copy of the book about anti-Italian American history, WAP. And sadly, I missed the editor's talk because we lost power and internet that week. So I was unable to sit in, but I really appreciate everything that you've done. And I think everybody associated with Italian American activities owes you a huge thank you.
The check is in the mail.
I hope I read it correctly. Okay. So what would you like me to talk about?
Well, a little bit about your background, first, second, third generation,
Okay.
growing up in Chicago.
Yeah, I grew up on the north side. We lived at 1248 Webster, 1401 Fullerton, then 1443 Olive in the Edgewater area.
I live on Alwood.
I went to Catholic schools for 13 years. I wanted to be a priest, of course.
Yeah.
My father was born in the projects, Cabrini Green. His parents are Sicilian from Menifee. My mother's ethnicity is less sure. Her grandparents, her grandmother was born in Alsace, her grandfather in Liechtenstein. I found out when I was in college that she was born out of wedlock. She kept it as a secret. I think she was embarrassed. So she told us that her aunts and uncles were our aunts and uncles. I always knew that they didn't treat us. I thought it's because they didn't like Italians or because there were 5 of us kids. I wasn't sure, but I identified much more strongly with my father's side of the family. he was the firstborn son. He took care of the family because his father fought in World War I and was gassed and spent a lot of time in our sanitariums for tuberculosis. My father didn't speak English until he went to school. He supported the family since he was 8. They were on welfare. He ran newspaper stands. I worked for him since the first time I worked for him, I was 8. I'm very proud of that fact.
Your family was from Sicily?
Pardon me?
You're
From Sicily?
Sicilian?
Yes, yeah. His father was from Menfi. I'm not sure about the mother. Her family, her birth certificate has the names Piso and Montalbano, but they spoke the same dialect. So I think it might still have been Girgenti or Agrigento. With a name, I was going to be named Vito, which is my grandfather's name, but my mother talked him out of it. So my name is Anthony Vito Joseph Ardizzone. And with that name, I certainly was treated Italian, whether or not, despite the fact that I wasn't complete Italian, but I always thought of myself that way. Back in the days when the issue was nationality as opposed to now ethnicity. I like to write, and I always wanted to write. I'm grateful to a 7th grade teacher named Ms. Bagnola. This was at St. Gregory's Grammar School, who told my parents at a parent-teachers meeting not to throw the boy away, which I think meant don't send him to St. Gregory's High School. Send him to an all-boys high school. So I went to the Christian Brothers up in Evanston, St. George High School. Then I went to the University of Illinois. I came back to Chicago for various reasons. I couldn't go to graduate school because of activities at Illinois. I lived on Taylor Street and then Flournoy. I taught at St. Mary's Center for Learning for 2 years. Coincidentally, that's the school that Tina DeRosa attended. I don't think our years overlapped. But then I went to school in Ohio, and then I got jobs. I worked in Ohio for a while. I worked at Old Dominion in Virginia. Then I worked at Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana. I'm waiting for your questions, Dominic, or else I'll just relate the story of my life. But I think we have more interesting things to talk about than that.
You gotta unmute yourself.
Oh, Carla? Let
Oh,
me
you're
bring you
tossing
into
this-
the conversation.
You're tossing it to me right away. Oh, first of all, I have to say, I've had the pleasure of meeting Tony Ardizzone across the screen a few times now since COVID has hit, and it's been a pleasure. As you know, Tony, I teach your works in my courses, and my students respond very favorably to them. I had a couple of different questions. I mean, the works that I deal with are certainly in the Garden of Papa Santuzzu. That's the one I teach most often. And I've also, looked at some of the short stories that you have in Taking It Home. And most recently, The Arab's Ox, which got reissued because I had it originally when it was Larrabee's Ox.
Yeah.
A couple of questions. First of all, even when it's a larger work like in the Garden of Papa Santuzzu, which is ostensibly a novel, the short story form seems to take precedent in your work. I was just wondering, maybe artistically, if you could talk a little bit about, why that particular genre seems to resonate with you, because even that one, and also with Larrabee's Ox, The Arab's Ox, you have these series of short stories that you can read and they stand alone as a short story, and yet they're very brilliantly pieced together throughout the narrative to create a whole work, which I find that particularly engaging as a reader to dive into those little vignettes and then to find how they connect to each other. I say maybe you could just speak a little bit to the creative process behind that, with the...
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. When I started teaching when I was at Old Dominion, we had a course called, no, there was no one to teach African-American literature. And in a department meeting, they said, we're going to have to get away from this course unless there's somebody willing to teach it. I said, I'll teach it, but we have to rename it. I want to take a multi-ethnic perspective. So then they called it minority writers. And it allowed me to teach something like Montalegro and some other works, and of course, works by African-Americans, et cetera. So I began to read widely. And the more I read, the more what I basically was doing what Sherwood Anderson did with Winesburg, Ohio, was writing, he argued for like a new looseness in American literature. And he argued strongly in support of the short story and the short story collection. Of course, I was influenced by Gloria Naylor's The Women of Brewster Place, which was the first self-named novel in stories. What I learned and what I began to teach, what I heard myself telling my students, was this was a way for writers to write about community as opposed to an individual. So it wasn't, it allowed me then to write a book with a multiplicity of characters. And of course I was influenced by Faulkner and the way that he fragments narrative perspective. So it allows me to fragment narrative perspective. In The Arab's Ox, there are three main characters. And then there's some stories, there's a story from another character who's a secondary character in those stories. But that then allows me to fragment the piece and then in some ways build a mosaic. And I took that approach in the Garden of Papa Santuzzu because I wanted to have a community of people, a village of people, a gathering around a fire of voices. I also, with Santuzzu, I was very much influenced by Maxine Hung Kingston's book, China Men, in which she tells the story of the Chinese and their movement into the Americas, but she imagines three different stories about how her grandfather might have come to the Americas. I thought this was wonderful. I would like to tell three different ways that Italians came to the Americas. So as you know, in the garden, we've got, through the Padroni system, we've got a woman who dresses as a man. We have relatives sending money and then coming over, et cetera, et cetera. So I like that form very much. I think The Whale Chaser is an exception because that has a single focus on a character, but I have alternating timelines. The book that I'm working on now, which is set in Rome and Croatia, also has a fragmented focus. So what I'm getting at is there's a fine line between interconnected stories in a novel. It just allows me the ability to tell a bigger tale through a variety of perspectives.
Oh, I think it's beautifully done. It's wonderful for me when sometimes I can't teach the whole work in a class, that to be able to pull out a story or maybe assign some of the short stories to the students and put them together. And I love the references you just made to all those other wonderful works of ethnic literature, Max Hong, and so, you know, how much immigrant or ethnic contributions have enriched, you know, the American literary canon overall is a very important thing. I had a little bit of a follow-up question with that. I hope you don't mind me keep concentrating on In the Garden of Papa Santuzzu. But another thing that really struck me with that, I mean, when you're telling the tale of an immigrant story, you know, it's a Sicilian family that's coming over, and it's so beautifully told through a variety of techniques, one of them being obviously a reference to oral storytelling, you know, that the characters are telling the story, and a lot of magical, almost magic realism with the symbolism and the different characters. And so to me, that was sort of a reference to traditional oral culture that was a big part of the storytelling of southern Italy. And at the same time, using the short story format and the way you ended at every section with the little couplets, obviously to me, that was a big reference to Boccaccio and the way he put together the Decameron, which is also a collection of short stories that form a novel, for lack of better words. So what was it that made you, to me, this is like a coupling of the best of like what we would call popular and high Italian culture to create that work. And it was that, your conscious thought in putting that together to blend the two. You're working as a writer in a literary form, and bringing in the more humble storytelling and blending it with what was considered to be like a form associated with one of the greats, not only of Italian literature, but world literature, Western world literature. So,
Well, that's wonderful.
yeah.
A long time ago, someone told me that I should never turn down a compliment, even if it wasn't deserved.
Oh,
That-
well.
that really wasn't in my mind. What was in my mind, I had recently read, and I very much like Italo Calvino's Italian folktales.
Yes.
And I noticed that the Southern ones ended with couplets and rhymes.
Yes.
And that's what I was copying.
Mm.
So I put in, I break page and I put in couplets and rhymes, and some of the sections of the novel are actually written in rhyme and verse in Cavaduzzo's of Cicero when he talks about Sicilian bread.
Yes.
That's all metered and rhymed early on. The first chapter told by Rosa Dolci as that, and I break page. Somehow, when I was younger as a writer, I think the story form stuck with me, and I felt that each chapter of a book shouldn't end with a cliffhanger to make you read the next. But rather give the reader a sense of some degree of satisfaction. So that then gives, in my mind, the economy of my chapters or my stories then have a sense of completion like a short story does. That's just in my DNA now. So it's the way that I wrote. I very much like the way that Ed Easy talked last week about how he has a very different structure, which works very definitely for the kind of book that he's writing. I've got them now, I'm reading them, and they're wonderful.
Yeah, he does the same thing. He has more of a cliffhanger ending at the end of his chapters that drag you in, but he's writing thrillers, which is different than,
Exactly. It makes you not want to stop. It makes you want to continue and read the next, which is really good. Yeah.
So, well, thank you. I mean, that's what I took away from it when I read it the first time. I remember just like, what a beautiful homage to like all the facets of Italian culture that come together in this, what I consider to be an ethnic novel, an Italian ethnic novel, and not just an ethnic novel, a beautiful American novel, but, with that special Italianità being brought into it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else have any questions? Dominic's in transition.
Tony, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. You won these awards. Tell us about the awards you won, and was there a ceremony and all that sort of thing? Did you meet other famous people, or?
The one award that
Did
did
you
have
hear
a
me?
ceremony was when Larrabee Zox received the Chicago Foundation for Literature Award. There was actually a ceremony in the Palmer House. And I was very, very happy because my father was alive then, and my mother is still alive. But I was very happy that they were able to attend. The other prizes, I guess I was in the right place at the right time. I was very fortunate, and was very pleased that that the books were getting that kind of attention. I was lucky because when I would hate to be writing fiction I would hate to be in my 20s right now, because when I was writing, there were many newspapers, and newspapers even carried sections. There was a book page. My first novel, In the Name of the Father, I got a wonderful review from Jerry Mangione in the Philadelphia Inquirer. Something like that wouldn't be possible today. I don't even know if the Philadelphia Inquirer is still alive, but I can remember when the Chicago Tribune had a separate book section. I don't even know if the Chicago Tribune reviews books anymore. When I lived in Virginia, I was a book reviewer for the Virginian Pilot and the Ledger Times, I think the name of the paper was. And we had our own, there was a page every Sunday with 3 or 4 reviews. So what I'm saying is I appreciate the kind of attention and the kind of network that writers had. And I mourn the fact that writers don't have as much attention now.
Vincent, you had a question? Can you turn on your microphone?
Yes. Hi. Yes, Maria had a question too. I guess generally I'm interested in how being Italian American might have influenced your career positively or negatively, and then also with your new book that you're working on, set in Croatia and Rome, seems like a big departure. And what are you doing in terms of research or to write about those distant places?
It's a wonderful question. I figured out early on, I mean, there are only so many things that can happen to a writer. And if a writer is working, even fewer things happen because the writer's, chained to the desk. So, it's not, what I figured is that I was dealt 3 cards, and one of them was my name and my father's family, my nana, my aunts, Eva and Guillermo. So I was dealt, it's Italian American, I was dealt Roman Catholic, I was dealt Chicago. So those were the cards I played. And I tried to play them for as long as I could. After a while, I realized that I would have to go out and get experience. So with the Moroccan book, when I was at Old Dominion in Virginia, they had an exchange program with Mohammed V University in Rabat, Morocco. And the director of graduate studies came out of his office door one day, saw me and said, "Hey, Tony, do you want to go to Morocco?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Good, then come in here and help me write this grant." So I worked with him for 2 years, and then I was able to go to Morocco to teach. And then I went back the next 2 summers, 2 years later, or 3 years later, because I had to see more. I've been to Rome several times. Through Indiana, I was able to go to Croatia, Yugoslavia, back when it was Yugoslavia. So I need experience. I need to write from the kinds of experiences that I have. The new book, the bulk of it is set in a narrow time frame. It begins on December 26, 2004, which was the morning of the devastating South Asian tsunami that killed over 300,000 people. And it ends in the following April with the death of John Paul II. I was in Rome on December 26, 2004. And I've been to Rome several times since. So I rely on those experiences.
Thank you.
So that helps me. And that is what I need. That's what I had. And fortunately, when I was in Yugoslavia, I also got into Bosnia and Herzegovina. I visited the city of Mostar. This was back before it was bombed. So I feel able to write about that. I don't feel that I can write about places I haven't seen. Obviously, the next question is, then how could you have written in the Garden of Papa Santuzzu? Well, if you notice, I couldn't do it realistically. In fact, I purposefully didn't go to Sicily because I didn't want the Sicily of today to influence or color the imagined Sicily. What I did is I hung up pictures of my grandfather, my grandmother, his mother. We had one photo of Vito's mother from Memphis. I hung them up on the wall, and when I was stuck, I looked at the pictures and said, "Hey, can you give me some help here?" And then I made something up. Did I come close? Did I come
Yeah,
close?
excellent. Wonderful.
You know, I can say something about that too. I mean, when I read in the Garden of Papa Santuzzo, Sicily is more of an interior place, I think. You know, it's carried in the memories of your characters. So like it doesn't really need to be a physical locale. I mean, I think you evoke it when those scenes when old Papa Santuzzo's like putting the hoe to the arid earth and wishing something would bear fruit there. But, you know, I would compare that. I know with the Arab's ox, I read one review of that where they talked about how beautifully you evoked Morocco in that work. And I think one reviewer even said that Morocco was like another character in the work. And it was even referred to as perhaps being, you know, rightly classified as travel literature. So I see a big difference between Sicily, ostensibly the locale in the Garden of Papa Santuzzo, versus Morocco, you know, being at the heart of the narrative the way it is in the Arab's ox. So I maybe just another question too. I know you reissued, that book came out again in 2018, just a couple of years ago. So, and that's when the title changed. It went from Larrabee's Ox to the Arab's Ox. Can you tell us why the reissue? What was the impetus behind that? Was that at your request or your publishers, or what was the desire to bring it to print under another title at a later date?
Well, first, let me say, with regards to In the Garden of Papa Santuzzu, here's a nod to Fred Gardefe. I told Fred that I was writing this book, and I said, "Fred, I don't think I can do it realistically, not after The Godfather Part 2. And Fred totally agreed. And I said, "I think I have to use folklore." And he said, "Absolutely, Tony." He said, "Take a different kind of approach." And I didn't feel at all capable of doing it realistically. With the second question, Larrabee's Ox was out of print. And again, Fred helped me here. I knew that Bordighera Press was available. And with Fred's generosity and Anthony Tamburi's generosity, they agreed to reissue a copy. The challenge came in that I didn't have it on disc. So I had to retype it. I had to give
wow.
them the Word document.
Wow.
That took me several months. I also had a broken finger on my left hand, which made typing very difficult. But as I went through, I was able to edit it. And other people had mentioned to me that I never should have called it Larrabee's Ox, which I was using the more Moroccan/French word, the Arab, Larabee is the way that Moroccans would pronounce it. But when you get the idea, when you hear the word Larrabee, it sounds like a Western. And the Arab's Ox is much cleaner. So in hindsight, I had the ability then to rewrite something. And I'd also seen some books that were reissued where the writers changed titles. And that's not uncommon with short stories. So that's how I did that. And I wanted to get the Arab's Ox back into print because some people had asked me about it and they said they had, that they had real difficulty finding copies of Larrabee's Ox. I never liked the cover. I didn't like the illustrations. Milkweed did the book, and I'm very grateful to Milkweed. I don't mean at all to complain. Writers don't have any kind of power over these kinds of things. But there's an ox on the cover that doesn't look, it looks more like a bull that's in India. I like what we have here much more. And I'm very grateful to Bordighera Press for having the book available.
I agree. I like the new cover. It's really much more attractive and draws you in. It's more appropriate for what the story's about too.
Yeah.
So we talk about this in my classes too. Like so many of the Italian American writers went out of print. Fred writes about this a lot, and finding the right public for it, making sure it's promoted the right way. I know Helen Berolini, who wrote Umbertina, talks about one of the reissues she had in which the cover looks like it's, one of those romance novels. And it was funny. One of my students buying a used copy to read in class came in with that. And I'm like, oh, that's the cover she was talking about. It has this woman being, wrapped in someone's arms and, gives you the entirely wrong impression of what the book's about. So, that relationship and with the writer and the publisher and the marketing is so important. And I agree that Bordighera has been doing wonderful things to making sure that these works are available and new works are being published and reaching a readership for sure.
Yeah, they're an incredibly valuable and wonderful asset to writers. I know that they've been very, very good for Olivia Kate Chironi and Hunger Saint.
The Hunger Saints, yeah.
And other writers.
Yeah, if I could jump in real quick, the Bordighera Press. I had a press, and Tony knows this, I think, if he remembers, way back in Chicago. I was standing at a Xerox machine, and one of my colleagues said, "How long are you going to be there?" And I said, "Well, I got to Xerox this book." She goes, "Why don't you just publish it? It'll be cheaper." And together, she and I and another colleague got together, and we started a press called City Snoop Press. And we published, I think we published Nonna in one of the collections.
Yes.
And back then, I learned firsthand what it was like to have a press. The books came to my house. I had to ship them. Every time we had a copy to send out, I had to put it in an envelope, bring it to the post office. We ended up being so successful, we went broke because we didn't price the things right. And we didn't really know financially what we were doing. So we gave we did 3 volumes and we gave it to another press. And then when Anthony Tamburi came to me and said, "What do you think about starting a press?" I said, "No, I don't want to do it." But he was insistent and we did it. And I said, "Okay, if Bordighera, we can't compete with any of the major presses. We don't have the money for public publicity and advertising and all that. But what I would like to do is to make sure that this is a safety net for all the good writing that falls through the cracks of other publishers." And, recently we've taken to reprinting books, which is a little more iffy because quite often you have to depend on library public sales to recoup the finances of your press. And Larrabee's Ox had already been in a lot of libraries, and a lot of the other books had. But again, the notion was that it's a safety net. We could, so Tony was on his own in terms of promoting the book, other than what small press and some of the smaller distributors will do. We'll send out review copies to anybody who wants them, but we're a not-for-profit press. None of us make any money at all on this. And so, but it's every book that comes out of Bordighera Press is something we believe in. And I didn't believe in anything more, especially during the time as the Muslim world was becoming more and more a part of the consciousness of the American world. And I thought what Tony did in Larrabee's Ox and now the Arab's Ox gave us a perspective that most people would challenge the stereotypical news information and the information you were getting on television at the time. So I said, yes, we have to do this. That's the background there.
You know, that went through my mind too with the timing. I was wondering if there was a reason for it being reissued at that time period because of so much more interest being with, you know, the Muslim world and what was going on. I didn't, you know, wondered if that was just.
It didn't really start that way.
Yeah.
Tony said, I want to get.
So that was, yeah, just a coincidence, but the timing was right. I get it. Yeah. So.
Well, I take it as a real blessing. Thank you again, Fred.
Thank you, buddy.
Please thank Anthony once again. What it did was it interrupted my work on what I was calling the Rome book. And it had several titles. One of which
call it the church book.
The church book. Well, yeah, and we're getting there. It at one point was called The Calling of St. Matthew. Another time I called it By the Fountain of the Four Rivers, a reference to Piazza Navona.
Oh, yeah.
What working on the Moroccan stories did is it took a big chunk of time. It must have been 6 or 7 months out of work on the Rome book, and got me back in touch with a book that was published in, oh God, I can't remember the original year. 1992 it came out. So I wrote it in the late 80s, early 90s, and it helped me stylistically.
Good.
You know, it would be interesting to talk to a musician and ask her or him or them, what is it like if you go back to some earlier music and play it? Is that going to affect the music that you create?
So you're saying the process of actually physically retyping it and revisiting it had you reflecting on your style. That's interesting. For
Exactly.
Sure. Yeah.
And what I was doing, I was also double checking everything.
Yeah.
I found some mistakes.
Mm.
And I was also double checking facts.
Mm-hmm.
And when I couldn't verify a fact, and I made like a leap, I came to a decision about, should I put this in the new book or should I not put it in the new book?
Mm.
An example is that in one of the short stories, a man who reveals himself as a policeman, he's plain clothes and he's there basically to protect people. He refers to himself as a Lenusha, and I couldn't, which actually means snake. There's a reference to snake in Moroccan, and I couldn't verify it. And I was in touch with several people and they hadn't heard it. So I thought maybe my notes were wrong. So I dropped it from that.
Mm.
And so I guess what I'm saying is it allowed me to get clearly in touch with where I had been several years before, and in some ways refreshed me, and certainly affected me. And I think I became, once again, a cleaner writer.
Mm-hmm.
When I was in graduate school, our teacher came in one day and said, and remarked about a friend of his. They were at a writer's colony. And remember, he's talking to graduate students, and he said, so I asked him, how was your day? And the friend said, great. 250 fewer words. And we sat there as graduate students going, what? I mean, because what our focus was like, you know, put the ink on the page, write. And only later did I realize that a lot of writing is knowing what to delete, is editing, is sharpening, and getting that down.
Yeah.
And that of course, that exercise helped me.
Mm. Thank you. That's, yeah.
I have a question from Italy.
Tony, hello.
Hello. how are you
I'm
doing?
so happy to listen to you and all of you. Very interesting tonight. First of all, about your story that's connecting Rome and Croatia, should you need any information or anything on your research, I lived in with the Croatian community here in Rome, and they have a very nice library. They have closed down because of the COVID, but
Mhm.
I'm still connected with them, with Padre Nagy and the Christian community. So whatever you should need, you just don't mind and ask us for it. And if
Thank
you
you.
find it yourself, then just fine. No, my
Thank you. That's
question
very
was,
generous. Thank you.
you're welcome. My question was actually focused on this concern, almost obsession that I personally have with keeping the two worlds connected. The Italian American community, where I grew up in Chicago, on the Chicago South Side, and the Italian culture here, talking about Sicilian culture, Sicilianicity. Um, it was just a curiosity. You know, we think about Sicilian literature here in Italy. It comes to our mind something like Giovanni Verga, Mastro Don Gesualdo, I Malavoglia, his philosophy, um, typically or so-called typically Sicilian about the roba, his novelle like La Lupa, and other authors like you were talking about Agrigento, if I did not misunderstand, Pirandello and his multiplicity of character. I used to teach a subject in high school, which was called comparative literature. Um, First of all, have you read and are you concerned, or is there also an influence of these Italian Sicilian authors in your works? Have you read them? And do you think it would be possible to compare both literatures and to keep connected in this sense?
I've read several, I've read a couple of the people you mentioned, but years ago. And I have to say that that right now, my focus is on writing, finishing this last revision of the Rome novel. I find that if I read very good work while I'm writing, it influences the next day. When I was at Indiana, I could always tell when my students were taking a course in Joyce because they would then suddenly put words together, scrotum tightening, snot green. And then they had these, it changed their style. I cannot touch Gabriel Garcia Marquez when I'm writing. So sad to say, I read less than I would like to. But I think what you propose is really an interesting idea. But I would have to go over the books again to give you a more informed answer. But I very much like what you have to say. And again, thank you for the opportunity. What I've learned and what I have are a couple of characters. One, a woman who grows up in Dubrovnik, spends time in Mostar, and also lives for a while, a portion of her life in a cloistered convent in the Biokovo Mountains, and then moves to Rome. And the other is a woman who lives in Rome, but her family is originally from Dalmatia, and they were driven across the sea to Molise, to Termoli, and then Campobasso, and lived in the community of Croatians there. So what I tried to do was, if I could, is as a part of the book was to unite those countries. And Dubravka is an important figure because as she works in Rome, she's central to the book. I'm happy to hear that about the Croatians in Rome, and it reaffirms some of the things that I myself have observed, and now some of the things that I'm writing about.
Well, Tony, maybe you should come to Rome next summer.
I would love to. I would absolutely love to.
If everything goes well, we've had to cancel our 2 Italian studies seminars. It's the only way we can get Italian American studies in the graduate program in the United States anywhere. And we have a 3-week program at Roma 3.
Mhm.
And hopefully we'll see Maria Rosaria there when we come. But, we got to figure out some way to get you there. And maybe do a reading, maybe give a talk. We can't afford to pay your flights, but we could certainly put you up for a few days at this beautiful hotel, which is about 20 minutes. It's inside Rome, but it's 20 minutes from downtown Rome. So it's not anywhere near the congestion, but you can easily take a bus there and it would be great. And then you can go visit the...
Let's talk about this.
We will.
Let's talk about this.
We haven't talked in a while.
I'm walking the streets of
networking.
Rome every day. This morning I was working on a scene in St. Agnes in Agony, right by the Piazza Navona, and it's in my mind.
It's spectacular.
Can't wait to see it.
We will be waiting for you here, Fred, Tony, and all of you.
I'll be there for sure.
Any
Actually, I
other
might be
questions?
teaching. I might be teaching at Roma 3 next spring. So we'll see.
Wow, that's great.
Any questions from the non-literary oriented scholars and readers out there? I didn't say non-literate, non-literary.
Can you say a little bit more about your newspaper days? It sounds like your family was in the trade, and I wrote a book about the history of newsboys, and I'm just curious how big a part of it was it of your life?
Oh, major.
You gotta read.
My father, let's see. My father worked for actually a bookmaker, and this was not the legal kind of bookmakers.
A real bookmaker.
And then he worked for Teletype Corporation. But always on the side, he always had 2 or 3 jobs. All right. And when I was younger, he owned and he ran newsstands downtown Chicago. This was to sell the Sunday papers to the people getting out of the movie theaters and restaurants on Saturday nights. This is where I helped him back when I was 8 years old. He also ran 4 newsstands near Union Station. On the corners of Canal, he ran one across the street from Florsheim Shoes, the one across the street there, one in front of Florsheim, and one in front of Cafe Bohemia, actually 5, and then one by the other entrance to the Union Station. And I worked there for as long as I lived in Chicago. All of this was off the books. All of this was undeclared. I sold the Chicago Tribune and the Chicago Sun-Times back when the papers were 7 cents. I learned about Red Streak. I learned how to count. The driver from the American was honest. Jack, who dropped off the Daily News, was dishonest and would short the bundles. And I kept count, and I was a good son. And I can remember my father backing Jack up against the lockers in the bowels of Union Station, talking to him about those bundles, talking about that money. Also, at times when I didn't have to work for him, I delivered afternoon papers in the Edgewater district in Chicago. So we always had newspapers. And one of the memories of my life, part of my childhood, is when we came home from the newsstands, which was about 7 o'clock. We would carefully wash our hands. We would sit down to eat whatever Ma had on the stove. And then he would pull out the folding table in front of the TV, spread it with newspapers, and we'd count the bags. We'd open up the bags and count the day's totals. And he had the bags from the different boys from the different stands. And he had the totals, and he would write on the paper, and he would shake his head and go, oh, Miska. And then he would, Miskino. And then I didn't take my tips out because, okay, but they took their tips out. And of course, that was part of their pay, but they were always short. And then we counted the money, we rolled them up. Remember those little coin wrappers? We rolled them up. He put them in bags, and then he hid them behind the drapes by the radiator. And then on Saturdays, we'd go to the currency exchange. And then he would, do that, cash them in and whatever. What else am I forgetting about the newspapers? Red Streak, Final Markets, and my little stacks of 17 cents. My nickel, 3 pennies, and a dime when people would throw a quarter at me, because I learned, and when I had the stand on Canal across the street from Florsheim Shoes, I learned that these guys were in a hurry. And when they wanted a paper, and they wanted it fast, and they didn't want me fumbling in my coin apron for change. I had change right there. I had the change, one hand 17. I had to go fast. And I'll tell you, the rushes would come, and then I'd have like a minute or two, and then the rush would come, and then I'd have a minute or two. And it was wonderful and exciting, and it was, I guess, in some ways, a really great time.
Right.
What can I ask about your connection with newspapers?
Well, I'm the son of Depression era newspaper boys and the nephew in Boston, and I grew up in California. And so my book that just came out 2019 from Oxford is called "Crying the News: A History of America's Newsboys." And it's won some nice awards recently, and it's a big 700-page book with a ton of pictures, and it's trying to give a historical perspective to the wonderful experience that you just described.
Yeah, it was. I tell you, my father sold newspapers when he was a kid in Grant Park, when he got off school. So it just was part of our. It was part of our life. And it has been part of my life.
And part of a working class experience and Italian immigrant experience for a lot of people.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I was going to say that too, that there's so many stories about the young boys working at the newsstands too. And I think even some of the early commentators, I know Amy Bernardi writes about the young boys out there selling papers when she's talking about, child labor practices amongst the immigrant communities there. So, but yes.
Yeah. I wanted to say one thing.
Tony, in Chicago, the Ricciglianese, sort of newsstands, and they too were bookies. How were you, how was your family, Sicilian, welcome into that group?
I don't know if I understand your question.
I don't think they were connected.
My father wasn't a bookie. No, he worked for like a printer. He worked for a printer. He was that kind of bookmaker. And this was early before he got a job at Teletype Corporation. Teletype used to be near, it was on Southport. And then when they moved their headquarters to Skokie, then he would drive out to Skokie. But he wasn't a bookie in that way. He worked.
My connection has been awful today. I apologize. Carla, why don't you carry on the conversation?
Oh, okay. Well, we're almost out of time, Dominic. I have one quick question. Tony, I now live on the north side of Chicago. I'm in Rogers Park, and I couldn't afford Edgewood because it's gotten pretty trendy right now.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
because
yeah.
I looked there first, but I have to ask, there's one story I remember reading in Taking It Home. I think it was Lady's Choice.
Yeah.
Lady's Choice. The setting for that would have been, I mean, the character there, I don't think it says, he doesn't even have a name, but you kind of read between the lines. It sounds like an Italian-American character who might be like a greaser type who's trying to pick up a more suburbanite young woman and they're at a CYO dance too. Is that coming from the setting of the, your high school days growing up? Is that informed by
My high school was all boys, Christian
Yeah.
brothers. No, on Sunday nights, back when I was in Chicago, Gordon Tech
Uh-huh.
had Sunday night, the dances, and you got in for 50 cents. You had to show your ID. That was the setting.
Okay.
And I gotta say that I like that story a great deal.
I do too. I love, yeah.
I tried to include it in the evening news, but the editor, Charles East, maybe it was because of space,
Oh,
but he said that he didn't want it to be included. So
interesting.
it's not in the evening news. But no, that was Gordon. I based that on Gordon Tech.
Okay.
And there used to be fights.
Yeah.
And indeed, yeah. And is that the story that mentions dupers?
Yes,
Oh,
the
this was-
duper greasers and dupers
In
too.
Chicago, it was an
Yeah.
anachronism for dear old Oak Parkers.
Parkers.
Okay.
I
Yeah,
never knew what it meant. I just knew that that's what collegiates meant.
yeah.
When I went to St. George, because I was from the city, I was a greaser.
Mhm.
The kids from the suburbs had more money, and they were the ones that wore these bleeding Madras shirts.
Yeah.
I mean,
Mhm.
literally, the colors would run when
Oh.
when they sweated. They were just like different. And there were occasional tensions between the two groups.
Yeah.
I went to school in Fenwick and Oak Park, and those were all dupers and climbers. The dupers were the working class kids who were more well off than we were. They were upper working class. But the social climbers, we call climbers, they were the ones who were higher up. So, but I
No,
was a greaser. Like Tony, I was a greaser.
So I love that, the image of the black leather jacket that goes through that story too, and how that marks him, for the police at the end, and like he's betrayed by the girl that, he was trying to make a connection with.
Yeah, they all thought we looked alike.
I know.
I wanted to mention something that, that's really important, I think, to ethnic writers, certainly to Italian-American writers and critics, and something that I would emphasize to my classes. And there's an African saying, until the lion learns to write, all of the stories will glorify the hunter. And I've really taken that to heart. I had a friend, Charles Johnson, who wrote Middle Passage that won the National Book Award. He's African-American.
Yes,
One of his
familiar with the
teachers
work.
told
Yeah.
him- One of his teachers told him early on, he said, every story that African-American writers write, every book they write should contain a little piece of African-American history. Because if we don't tell it, no one's going to tell it. So, for example, in The Whale Chaser, I tell the story, La Storia Segreta, the story of how the fishermen in Monterey, the Italian fishermen, how their boats were seized, and how as a result they lost their houses, and how in effect the community was destroyed. My editor, Jordan Miller at Academy Chicago, he said, when he read the book, he said, "Is that true? Did you make that up?" And then I sent him articles. He said, "That's amazing. How come we never hear that Italians and Italian Americans were interned?" I said, talk to these people. They didn't talk about it. They were ashamed. You don't talk about how okay. And you can read the documents from the people who lived through La Storia Segreta, and there's a website, and there's a traveling exhibit about it. But what I want to emphasize is no matter what a person's background is, and certainly ethnicity now and identity politics are forefront, I think, in our culture, and these are important issues. The idea about the lion learning to write and telling its story becomes increasingly more important.
No, that's a beautiful saying. I've never heard that before, but certainly we talk a lot about, seeing yourself represented in art, in literature is affirming and validating and very important. So
I know we're running out of time, but down
you do
here
have,
down here there was
there's a
little
question in the
pop-up
chat
here.
for you.
I don't know how to access it.
Okay, it says, I have a question for you, Tony. Where did you get your desire to write? Were you influenced by your dad working for a paper, selling newspapers, etc.?
Let me think. I think my influence to write came from my reading. It wasn't because of newspapers. It basically was to escape we had a small house, we lived, 5 kids. I would go down to the corner of Clark and Peterson, where there was a mobile library every Saturday morning, and carry up more books. And the librarian would say, I don't know, you're taking too many. How are you going to read all those? And don't worry, I said, I'll read them all. I read, and I really envied writing. And when I was and this is something I can still remember, when I was in high school at St. George, one of the kids, I think his name was Eddie, he got put into juvie home, and he was gone for about 6 months. And he came back, and we were at Harry's house. Harry's older brother would buy liquor for us to drink. So we were drinking, and Eddie came in, and underneath his arm, he had a sheaf of papers, ragged. Hey, Eddie, we said, how great it was to see you. Wonderful. And what's that? Finally, Harry says, and Eddie said, I wrote half a novel. And something within me kind of like, just jumped up, jealousy. And I said, to myself, I'm going to write a whole novel. And I can vividly remember the jealousy I felt. Mm-hmm. I had never been jealous of Eddie. I mean, he ended up in juvie home. Okay. But, I wanted to be a writer, and frankly, I liked stories, and I liked lying. I really did. I really liked making things up. So that's one thing led to another. And then I happily was able to channel it in a kind of good way.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I think we can call it storytelling, not lying.
All right. Well,
telling stories, telling tales.
I was channeling that high school boy.
Yeah.
Who thought it was lying.
The literature is beautiful. I talk to my students all the time, that when you read,
Well,
the work, the work comes to life again, because it's interactive. Like you have the author who put it down on the page and created a work. And then once it's there, when it's shared with other readers, they bring themselves into the reading experience. And that's why I think it's so important to read lots of different things, but especially for Italian Americans, to read works by other Italian Americans, and share in the experience. And, if you're going to go on and be a writer yourself, you should be aware of what other creative artists are out there and what they've done and how they've contributed, so that, you can position yourself. So I don't know if Dominic has, do we have any other questions in the chat, Dominic, or we're after our,
It's not lying, it's vivid imagination.
Vivid imagination, there you go. So
I have a real quick story. About the Continental Bank. A friend of our family, Vince Lizzo, was a paper boy a long time ago. And he used to sell the newspapers to the president. He had to bring the newspaper up to the president of the Continental Bank. And eventually he gave him a job and he became a president of Continental Bank, Vince Lizzo.
Tony, you didn't give the paper to the right people, Tony.
There we go. Yeah. There we go. There we
You
go.
didn't work outside the Continental Bank.
Yeah. I see one last question in the chat. They want to know the title for the book you're working on between Rome and Croatia. Do you have a working
Today's title.
Oh, do you have a working title, or does it keep revolving?
It keeps revolving.
Okay.
Okay.
When I settle,
Oh.
right now, I'm at a point where I'm going to start to write to some agents and see if someone will represent it. And then I'll put it on my website. Right now, I just say new work, a novel set in Rome and Croatia. So
Okay.
I have some, it's like, what are you going to name the baby? And well, the names I had so far are not going to work. So I don't know. I'm not sure yet. But once I get a little closer, thank you for asking me. Who asked the question?
Let me go up and
But
see.
once I get closer,
Mary
I'll-
Rubino asked the question.
Yeah, I'll announce it.
Don't
Okay.
name it after the
I know what I'm
grandparents.
not going to call the book.
Don't name it after the grandparents.
Uh-oh.
Oh, no, I won't. Yeah.
All right. Well, we're over time. I guess we should close out here. I don't know if Dominic is still with us.
He's
Okay.
lost in the library.
Okay, I was lost in the library. I just have to give a shout out for how much I love your work, how much I love your
Thank you.
literature. And I would encourage anybody to, I haven't read not the one you're writing, obviously, but the last one that was published. So that's on my list to get to, but
Thank
such
you.
beautifully evoked stories that are,
And I truly am grateful to you for reading the work and for taking it seriously. I wish that other critics would include Italian American writers in that basket when they talk about ethnic American literature.
I do too.
I think when I started the class at Indiana. I put Italians in the group. My colleagues who also taught the class, to my knowledge, did not ever teach any Italian American writers. Their sections were made up of what we think of the more traditional ethnic groups. And I don't know. I think that in some ways the circle should be, the Venn diagram should be wider. So I'm always grateful when I come across writers and teachers who include Italian American writers.
Well, I definitely agree with that. And I have to also give another shout out to Fred, because I think he was the one that encouraged, he is the one who encouraged me in that direction. And I approached my English department to teach my first Italian American literature course. And, it was ethnic literature, and students were surprised by some of the content, and they all had a very good experience with it. So it transcends the particular and can touch on a lot of different students from different backgrounds, and it contributes to the overall conversation and dialogue. So thank you for giving us such wonderful works
Thank you.
to continue to teach. And I'm going to give you a bravo, grazie.